1 minute ago, a revelation detonated inside palace walls. A private letter, allegedly written by Diana herself, has surfaced, and its contents threaten to shatter everything the monarchy has protected for decades. According to the document, Prince Harry's biological father may not be who the world believes. And in a move that signals panic at the highest level, Prince William has ordered a second DNA test. But why now? And what does William know that we don't? Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The letter did not arrive like ordinary correspondence. It surfaced in silence, passed through guarded hands, sealed in an envelope thick with age, its paper faintly scented with time and secrecy, as though it had been waiting for the precise moment to be found. Those who handled it felt it immediately, that strange suffocating weight, the sense that this was not just history but a loaded truth, something buried with intention, something protected at all costs. And when it was finally unfolded, the handwriting, unmistakably Diana's, seemed to reach across decades with urgency, with warning, with something dangerously close to fear. William's hands froze as his eyes scanned the lines, his jaw tightening, his breath turning shallow as each word pulled him deeper into a reality he had spent years refusing to confront. The tone was not speculative, not uncertain, but deliberate, emotional, and devastatingly clear, as Diana wrote not as a princess bound by duty, but as a mother cornered by truth, a woman trying to preserve something fragile before it was erased. And then, the line that changed everything. One name, written with quiet certainty, identifying Harry's real father, sent a shock through him so sharp he had to steady himself against the table. It couldn't be dismissed. Across the palace, the reaction was immediate and electric. Corridors once filled with routine whispers now humming with tension. Doors closing faster. Voices dropping lower. Meetings convened without record or schedule. Senior aides moved quickly, their faces pale, their movements clipped, as though even acknowledging the letter aloud might give it power. Within hours, entire sections of internal communication were locked down, files restricted, access denied, the institution shifting into defense mode with a precision that revealed just how much was at stake. And at the center of it, William did not hesitate. He issued the order with a firmness that left no room for debate, demanding a second DNA test. Not as a question, but as a necessity. His voice controlled, but his hands betraying him. Fingers tightening, unclenching, tightening again as the implications pressed down on him like a leaden crown. This wasn't just about truth anymore. It was about survival, of identity, of legacy, of the monarchy itself. Harry, by contrast, was blindsided, the revelation reaching him not as a quiet disclosure, but as a fracture, sudden and disorienting. The ground beneath him shifting as years of belief, memory, and belonging began to unravel. Those close to him saw it instantly, the way his posture stiffened, the way his eyes searched for something stable and found nothing, the way silence settled around him like a storm waiting to break. Because this was never just a family matter, it was a question of succession, of legitimacy, of a narrative carefully constructed over decades and now hanging by a thread, threatened by a single piece of paper written in a mother's desperate hand. And as the weight of that truth begins to settle, as the monarchy braces for what could come next, one reality becomes impossible to ignore. This letter was never meant to be found. But the letter alone wasn't enough to shake a future king. Something in William's past had already planted the seed of doubt. Long before this letter resurfaced, whispers had followed Harry like a shadow. Comparisons, speculations, quiet glances at public events. While the world dismissed them as tabloid cruelty, insiders claim William once asked a question he never dared say aloud again. Was Harry truly their father's son? And if so, why did doubt linger in the background of royal history like a ticking clock waiting for its moment? The unease did not begin with the letter. It began years earlier, woven into childhood moments and subtle differences that refused to go unnoticed. As William stood beside his younger brother at formal appearances, his posture stiffening, his eyes flickering with something unspoken whenever the comparisons surfaced again. It was never said directly, never acknowledged in public, but in private the contrast lingered. Features, mannerisms, even the way Harry carried himself, Details that palace observers quietly dissected while William absorbed it all in silence, his thoughts tightening into questions he could not safely release. There were conversations, carefully contained, held behind closed doors where voices stayed low and measured, where advisors chose their words with surgical precision, and where William, still young but already burdened by the weight of the crown, pushed for clarity without ever fully crossing the line. He did not accuse. He did not confront, but his questions hovered, circling the same fragile truth, as though he feared that saying it outright might make it irreversible. And each time, the answers he received were controlled, deflective, wrapped in reassurances that felt rehearsed rather than real. Diana, at the center of it all, remained both present and unreachable on the matter, her silence not empty but deliberate, her protection of certain truths so fierce it created more tension than resolution. When the subject drifted too close, those who witnessed it recalled the shift instantly. Her body stiffening, her expression tightening, her voice soft but final as she redirected, deflected, and ultimately shut the door on any deeper inquiry. It was not denial, it was containment. For William, the pressure built slowly, relentlessly, as his role as heir demanded composure while his instincts pulled him toward doubt, the contrast between duty and suspicion carving a quiet fracture inside him that he learned to hide with precision. Harry, the spare, moved through life with a different freedom, yet unknowingly carried the weight of questions he had never asked. His place in the family, both secure and in William's private mind, unsettlingly uncertain. The imbalance was impossible to ignore. And then, years before the world ever imagined such a possibility, a test was conducted. Discreet, unrecorded, shielded from public knowledge with the full force of the institution behind it. William remembered the moment it was mentioned, the way his breath caught, his pulse quickened, his hands clenched as hope and dread collided in equal measure. Answers were coming, or so he believed. But what returned was not clarity, it was ambiguity. Results that resolved nothing and yet suggested everything. Language so carefully constructed it felt like a wall rather than a window, leaving William suspended between belief and suspicion, his mind circling the same question with no place to land. It was worse than the doubt itself, and over time he buried it, or tried to, locking it beneath years of duty, discipline, and controlled silence, convincing himself that whatever truth existed had already been contained, already neutralized, already rendered harmless by the institution built to protect them all. But doubt does not disappear. It waits. Because now, with Diana's letter in his hands and the past clawing its way back into the present, that old uncertainty is no longer distant, no longer theoretical, no longer contained, and the question he once buried is rising again. Sharper, louder, impossible to ignore. If one DNA test had already been done, the question becomes even more explosive. What did it reveal? Years ago, behind locked doors and under absolute secrecy, a DNA test was reportedly conducted, quietly, discreetly, and never acknowledged publicly. The results were said to be sealed, classified, buried beneath royal privilege. But buried truths don't stay buried forever. If the first test existed, and the second is happening now, what changed? And who altered the narrative in between? It began not with certainty, but with pressure, a slow accumulation of whispers, private concerns, and carefully noted inconsistencies that reached a point where silence was no longer sustainable, forcing a decision that could never be undone. Senior advisors were drawn in, not publicly, not formally, but through quiet summons and coded conversations, their loyalty unquestioned, their discretion absolute, as they stepped into a matter that carried consequences far beyond a single family. What they were asked to oversee was simple in instruction yet devastating in implication. A test that could confirm everything or unravel it entirely. William was not meant to feel the full weight of it then, but he did. His body stiffening as fragments of information reached him, his breath catching when certain phrases lingered too long in conversation, his instincts sharpening as he realized this was no longer rumor but action. The decision had been made. And once made, there was no retreat. Those involved operated with surgical precision, movements unrecorded, documentation minimized, every step designed to leave no trace beyond the result itself, as though the truth, whatever it might be, needed to exist but never be seen. Confidentiality was not requested, it was enforced. Each advisor bound not just by duty but by an unspoken understanding of what exposure would mean. Not scandal, but structural damage to the very foundation of the monarchy. The stakes were suffocating. And yet, when the results came, they did not bring resolution. They brought something far more dangerous, a fracture. The language was careful, almost evasive, its conclusions wrapped in technical ambiguity that allowed for interpretation while committing to nothing, leaving those who read it with a strange, hollow tension, as though the answer had been deliberately softened, reshaped, contained before it could fully exist. It was not a denial. It was not a confirmation. It was something in between. In the weeks that followed, subtle shifts began to emerge. Timelines adjusted, narratives reinforced, public appearances calibrated with a precision that felt too deliberate to be coincidence, as though the institution itself was quietly correcting course without ever admitting it had veered ad. All. To the outside world, nothing had changed. But inside, everything had. Diana, during this period, carried a tension that did not go unnoticed by those closest to her. Her composure holding, but her eyes betraying something deeper, something unresolved, as if she were watching a truth being reshaped in real time, and realizing she could not stop it. Her silence grew heavier, her movements more guarded, her trust narrowing to almost no one. And beneath it all, a quiet urgency began to take hold. She knew something, and she knew it wouldn't stay hidden forever. For William, the aftermath was worse than the doubt that came before, because now there had been an answer, or something that claimed to be one, and it had only deepened the uncertainty, leaving him caught between what he was told to accept and what his instincts refused to silence. He tried to move forward, to bury it again, to trust that whatever had been decided was final. But the cracks remained. Because when truth is managed instead of revealed, it doesn't disappear. It distorts. It lingers. It waits for the moment when something, or someone, forces it back into the light. And now, years later, that moment has arrived. Not through another test, not through another quiet decision, but through something far more personal, far more dangerous, and far more impossible to control. And then came the letter, written in Diana's own voice, turning private suspicion into undeniable accusation. What kind of secret compels a mother to write a confession she never intended the world to see? In the alleged letter, Diana doesn't whisper, she declares. She speaks of fear, of pressure, of choices made under emotional isolation. Most chilling of all, she names the man she claims is Harry's biological father. If true, it isn't just a revelation. It's a detonator aimed at the heart of the crown. The words do not read like speculation. They land with the weight of lived truth, each sentence pressed with urgency, each line carrying the strain of a woman who had reached the edge of silence and could no longer hold it together. Her handwriting, firm yet uneven, seems to pulse with emotion, as though every stroke carried hesitation, then resolve, then something dangerously close to relief. And as William reads, his grip tightens, his breath falters, his chest rising and falling in sharp, uneven rhythm as the full force of her voice reaches him across time. This was not doubt. This was confession. She writes of isolation in a way that feels suffocating, describing a life surrounded by people yet devoid of safety, her words threading together fear, pressure, and a quiet desperation that had nowhere to go, as though she had been forced into decisions that could never be undone, choices shaped not by freedom but by constraint. There is no attempt to soften it, no effort to protect the institution in her phrasing, only a raw, unfiltered account of what it meant to exist within it, to carry secrets that grew heavier with every passing day, to know that truth itself had become dangerous. And then, without hesitation, she names him. The moment lands with brutal clarity, the name cutting through the page with a finality that leaves no space for reinterpretation. A man whose proximity to Diana had long existed within quiet speculation, now pulled into undeniable focus, with a single line that refuses to be ignored. William's eyes fix on it, unmoving, his body going rigid as memory and disbelief collide, his mind racing through years of controlled narratives in carefully maintained distance. now collapsing under the weight of a truth written in his mother's own hand. It changes everything. But even within that revelation, her concern does not center on scandal, it centers on William, her words softening just enough to reveal the fear beneath them. The fear of what this truth would do to him, how it would fracture not just his understanding of his brother, but his understanding of himself, his role, his future. She writes as a mother first, warning him, preparing him, asking him to carry something no son should ever be asked to bear. Her sentences laced with a quiet plea that feels as heavy as the confession itself. The timing of the letter only deepens its impact, written during a chapter already marked by instability, when pressures around her were tightening, when scrutiny was relentless, when trust was scarce and choices were narrowing, giving the entire document a sense of urgency that feels almost prophetic. This was not written in calm reflection. This was written when everything was already beginning to fracture. And buried within the final lines, there are instructions, deliberate and unmistakable, dictating when the letter should be opened, when the truth should be allowed to surface. As though Diana understood that timing would determine everything, that revelation without preparation could destroy more than it revealed. It was never meant for the world. It was meant for William. Because in the end, the weight of it all is placed squarely on him. Not just the knowledge, not just the decision, but the moral burden of what comes next. Whether to protect the institution that shaped him or honor the truth that defined her. A choice that tightens around him now as the past refuses to stay buried, and the present demands an answer he may not be ready to give. But naming a father in ink is one thing. Proving it in blood is another. This time, William didn't hesitate. Sources claim he ordered the second DNA test immediately, personally overseeing every detail. No intermediaries. No room for manipulation. If the first test left questions unanswered, this one would leave none. But what drives a future king to risk destabilizing the monarchy, unless he fears the truth is even more dangerous than silence? The shift in him was unmistakable. The quiet restraint that once defined his approach replaced by something sharper, more urgent, as though the letter had stripped away his last defense against the truth, leaving only action in its wake. His movements became precise, controlled, but beneath that control was tension. His jaw set, his hands tightening at his sides, his thoughts moving faster than he could contain them, as he made it clear that this time there would be no ambiguity, no softened language, no carefully managed conclusions. This time, it would be absolute. The confrontation with Harry did not come gently. It arrived heavy with everything left unsaid for years, the air between them thick with history, loyalty, and something dangerously close to betrayal, as William finally forced the conversation they had both avoided. Harry's reaction was immediate, his posture stiffening, his eyes locking onto his brother with a mixture of disbelief and rising anger, his breath uneven as the implication settled in. Not just a question of biology, but a fracture in identity itself. Neither of them stepped back. Neither of them softened. It was inevitable. William did not accuse, but he did not retreat either, his voice measured yet unyielding as he pushed forward, insisting that the truth, whatever it was, could no longer remain buried beneath years of silence and institutional control. For Harry, the moment cut deeper than any public scrutiny ever had. His hands clenching, unclenching, his thoughts racing through memories that now felt unstable, unreliable, as though the foundation of his life had shifted without warning. The bond between them held, but it strained. Behind the scenes, the response was immediate and alarmed. Legal advisors stepping in with urgency, their warnings delivered in careful, deliberate tones that failed to hide the gravity beneath them, outlining consequences that stretched far beyond personal revelation. Succession, legitimacy, public trust, the very pillars that upheld the monarchy, were now at risk of being questioned, re-examined, potentially undone, all because of a truth that refused to stay contained. The institution had weathered scandals before. This was something else. Catherine, removed from the direct conflict yet deeply within its reach, felt the shift just as sharply, her composure steady on the surface, but her private reaction far more telling, as those closest to her noted the quiet tension in her movements, the way her hands lingered just a moment longer. on still objects, the way her silence carried weight rather than absence. She understood what this meant, not just for William, not just for Harry, but for everything they were meant to represent. And at the center of it all, William stood between two forces that could not coexist. His role as brother pulling him toward protection, his role as future king demanding clarity. The collision of those identities tightening around him with every passing moment. The choice was no longer theoretical, it was happening. Because once the order was given, there was no turning back, no quiet containment, no carefully constructed narrative strong enough to hold back what might come next. As the process began with a finality that sent a ripple through every layer of the palace, from its highest offices to its most guarded corridors. And as the samples were taken, the palace began preparing for outcomes it hoped would never surface. Imagine discovering that your entire identity may be built on a question mark. According to insiders, Harry's response wasn't rage, it was silence. A silence heavier than accusation. Was he betrayed by secrecy, or had he always suspected something was different? And if the DNA test confirms the letter, does it free him, or exile him permanently from royal history? The shift in Harry was immediate, but not explosive, not outward, not the kind of reaction the world had come to expect from him. Instead, it was withdrawal, a quiet retreat inward, his posture tightening, his gaze drifting, his voice becoming measured to the point of absence as those closest to him noticed the change and struggled to reach through it. He did not lash out, he did not deny, he absorbed it, and in that absorption something far heavier began to take shape. There were calls between the brothers, not frequent, not easy but necessary, each one carrying the strain of everything left unresolved, their voices controlled yet charged, pauses stretching longer than words, as if both were navigating a truth neither fully understood yet could no longer avoid. William pushed for clarity, for completion, for an end to uncertainty, while Harry hovered in a different space entirely, caught between wanting answers and fearing what those answers might take from him. The distance between them was no longer physical, it was something deeper. And beside Harry, steady but unyielding, Meghan's presence became a force of direction, her stance clear, her voice firm as she urged transparency over protection, truth over preservation, her belief unwavering that whatever the result, it was better than living inside a question that would never stop echoing. She saw the toll it was taking on him, the sleepless tension, the tightening of his expression, the way his hands stilled when conversations drifted too close, and she refused to let silence win again. Because beneath it all, this was not entirely new to Harry. Not in feeling, not in instinct, as a lifetime of subtle distance began to resurface. Moments he had once brushed aside now returning with unsettling clarity. The sense of being slightly outside, slightly different, never fully anchored. In the same certainty as his brother. It had never been defined. But it had always been there. Now that feeling had a shape. And with that shape came a psychological weight that pressed in from all sides. His thoughts circling relentlessly. His identity no longer a fixed point but something shifting. Unstable. As though every memory, every role, every expectation placed upon him was being re-examined through a lens he never asked for. His breath shortened at times, his shoulders tensed without warning, the quiet becoming louder than any confrontation could have been. It was not just doubt, it was disorientation. Yet even as he faced it privately, another fear crept in, sharper, more immediate, the possibility of exposure, of the results surfacing before he had the chance to process them, of the world turning his most personal uncertainty into spectacle, judgment, and irreversible narrative. The monarchy had always controlled the story. But this time, control felt fragile, and so he waited, caught between two outcomes that both carried loss, knowing that whatever truth emerged would not simply answer a question, it would redefine everything that came before it, and everything that would follow, leaving him suspended in a moment that refused to resolve. Because the truth, if exposed, would not only fracture a family, it could redraw the monarchy itself. If Harry's paternity changes, so does history. Titles. Legitimacy. The delicate architecture of succession could face its greatest tremor in modern times. Royal experts speculate that the fallout wouldn't just be personal, it would be constitutional. and the crown has survived wars, abdications, and scandals. But has it ever survived a revelation like this? The implications ripple outward with a force that cannot be contained, beginning not with emotion but with law, as constitutional frameworks built on bloodline and legitimacy begin to strain under a question they were never designed to answer. Behind closed doors, legal minds move quickly, their voices low, urgent, their language precise yet edged with tension, as they dissect possibilities that once seemed unthinkable. What defines royal lineage if biology itself is called into question? And who decides which truth holds power when? Identity and institution collide? For Harry, the consequences stretch far beyond personal revelation, reaching into titles that were never meant to be uncertain, inheritance that was assumed to be fixed, and a place within history that now feels disturbingly fragile, as though it could shift beneath him with a single confirmed result. The weight of it presses in, his shoulders tightening, his breath catching as the realization takes hold that this is no longer about who he is privately, but who he is allowed to be publicly, permanently, and in the eyes of a system that does not adapt easily. Across the Commonwealth, the tension begins to echo, not loudly, not yet, but enough to stir unease among those who have long viewed the monarchy as a symbol of continuity, not contradiction. As questions begin to form in quiet political circles about stability, trust, and the integrity of an institution that has always depended on the illusion of certainty. The crown, after all, is not just national, it is global, and any fracture at its core sends tremors far beyond palace walls. Inside the palace, strategies begin to take shape with calculated urgency, advisors mapping out responses before the truth has even arrived, their discussions layered with contingency upon contingency, each one designed to contain, redirect, or soften the potential fallout. Statements are drafted in silence, scenarios rehearsed in private, and yet beneath it all, there is an understanding that no strategy can fully control what this revelation might ignite. Some truths do not bend, and outside, beyond the controlled corridors and guarded conversations, public opinion waits like a gathering storm, divided before it even knows the outcome, as generations interpret the possibility through entirely different lenses, some seeing it as betrayal, others as liberation, some questioning the monarchy's credibility, others defending its right to protect itself at all costs. The unity the institution depends on begins to fracture before the truth has even surfaced. Because at the heart of it all lies a risk far greater than scandal, the risk that the monarchy itself could be seen not as a symbol of stability, but as an architect of deception, a structure that maintained its image not through truth, but through careful, deliberate control of it. And once that perception takes hold, it becomes almost impossible to reverse. Yet even as the debates intensify, as legal frameworks strain and public trust begins to shift, the most critical piece of this unfolding crisis remains just out of reach, suspended in a place where speculation cannot yet become fact, where fear cannot yet become consequence, where everything still hangs in fragile uncertainty. And yet, even as lawyers debate consequences, the lab results edge closer to completion. 48 hours. That's how long the palace has reportedly waited for the final results. No statements. No public appearances. Just silence. The kind of silence that feels like a storm holding its breath. Behind the gates, insiders describe tension so thick it's almost visible. Because once the envelope opens, nothing returns to normal. The waiting is not passive, it is suffocating, stretched across hours that refuse to move, as every corner of the institution tightens under the pressure of what is coming, each second carrying the weight of a truth that cannot be undone. Inside the lab, confidentiality is absolute, reinforced at every level, identities concealed, processes segmented, access restricted so completely that even those within the palace are left outside its final stages, forced to trust a system they cannot control. It is deliberate. It has to be. Security around both brothers shifts almost imperceptibly, but unmistakably, movements tracked more closely, access narrowed, presence monitored with a precision that signals just how fragile this moment has become, as though the truth itself requires protection before it has even been revealed. William feels it most sharply, the isolation closing in around him. His routine stripped back, his conversations reduced, his thoughts left to echo louder in the quiet, his hands restless, his breath uneven as anticipation settles into something heavier than fear. It is responsibility in its rawest form. Beyond the palace walls, the media begins to sense it, not through confirmation, but through absence, through the unusual stillness that replaces the carefully maintained rhythm of royal visibility. Journalists watching, speculating, their instincts sharpening as patterns break in silence. Stretches longer than it should. Something is coming. They can feel it. And within that silence, Catherine and Meghan exist in parallel, separated by circumstance yet bound by the same looming uncertainty, each processing the moment in her own way, their composure intact on the surface but beneath it, a current of reflection that cannot be ignored. Catherine remains steady, but her stillness carries weight, her thoughts fixed on William, on what this will demand of him, on what it may take away. Meghan, by contrast, leans into the inevitability of truth, her focus unwavering, her concern anchored not in the institution, but in Harry, in what this revelation will mean for the man behind the title. Through it all, contingency plans multiply, drafted, revised, refined in rapid succession, statements prepared for outcomes no one dares to name aloud, strategies built to absorb impact, to redirect narrative, to hold together what may be on the verge of fracture. The institution does what it has always done: prepare, protect, preserve. But this time there is an undercurrent of uncertainty that no amount of planning can fully eliminate. Because this is different. This is not rumor, not speculation, not something that can be dismissed or contained with careful language and controlled appearances. This is an answer. And answers change things. William feels the moment approaching long before it arrives, his body tense, his mind racing through every possibility, every consequence, every version of the future that could unfold depending on what waits inside that sealed result, his fingers pressing into his palms as if grounding himself against the inevitability of what comes next. There is no more delay, no more distance, only truth. And when the results finally arrived, they didn't just answer a question, they ignited a reckoning. The envelope was opened. The truth, long buried beneath decades of silence, finally stepped into the light. According to leaked insiders, the results confirmed what Diana's letter claimed, or perhaps revealed something even more complicated. Either way, the bond between brothers will never be the same, and the monarchy now faces a crossroads that history books may one day call its most defining moment. William did not speak at first, his hands steady but unmoving as his eyes locked onto the final lines, his breath slowing into something controlled, deliberate, as though he were forcing himself to absorb it not as a brother, but as a future king. The words did not blur, they did not shift. They remained fixed, undeniable, their meaning cutting through years of uncertainty, with a clarity that felt both relieving and devastating at once. His jaw tightened, his shoulders squared, the weight of the crown settling heavier than it ever had before. This was the answer he had demanded, and now it was his to carry. Across from him, Harry's reaction moved in a different direction entirely. Quieter, deeper, his body still but his eyes revealing the storm beneath, as realization spread through him not in a single moment, but in waves, each one reshaping something fundamental inside him. If the result confirmed the letter, then his life had been built on a version of truth that was never complete. And if it revealed something more complex, something less absolute, then the uncertainty itself became its own kind of sentence. Either way, there was no returning to who he had been before this moment. That version of him was gone. For a long stretch of silence, neither of them spoke, the space between them filled with everything that could not be easily said, years of brotherhood now reframed through a truth that refused to fit neatly into loyalty or betrayal. William's instinct to protect clashed violently with his duty to acknowledge, while Harry stood at the center of it all, no longer just the spare, but something far more complicated, far more exposed. The bond remained, but it had changed. The palace moved quickly, almost instinctively, shaping its response with the precision of an institution that had faced crisis before, though never quite like this. Drafting a statement that acknowledged just enough while withholding what could not yet be controlled, its language careful, measured, designed to stabilize rather than reveal. To the public, it would appear composed. Internally, it was anything but. Because beyond the statement, beyond the carefully chosen words, the reality was already shifting. Family dynamics recalibrating in real time. Roles once assumed now questioned. Relationships once stable now carrying an undercurrent that could not be undone. Catherine remained at William's side, her presence steady, anchoring him as the implications unfolded, while Meghan stood firm beside Harry, her focus unwavering as he faced a truth that had rewritten his place in the world. And even as this revelation settles, as the monarchy braces and the world begins to react, a quieter, more unsettling question lingers beneath it all, threading through every corridor, every conversation, every guarded silence. If this truth was hidden for so long, what else remains buried, waiting for its moment to surface? Because in the House of Windsor, blood may define lineage, but truth defines legacy. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.